experienced designers who have been working with a variety of different projects in arts and in entertainment. And I think the common denominator for all of these projects are that they involve some kind of interaction. They're also some of the hosts of an event called Alibis for Interaction, which is held annually in Sweden and which touches upon different parts of interaction in arts and entertainment. But today we have invited them to tell us about how they can make Americans touch each other. So please give a hand to Jok and Bjarke.
Hello.
We're Johanna and Bjarke. We're from a participation design agency. So what our company does is strategic consulting and original design work in participatory storytelling, human interaction of all kinds, and community design. Our work has a really wide scope. It ranges from experience design for cinemas, for cultural institutions, and for the public sector, to narrative consulting for VR projects. All of this sounds really vague, I know. Ask us after. We design games for museums and rock festivals. We advise organizations ranging from AAA digital games companies to contemporary arts institutions on areas like participation and community design. And finally, we also make big immersive narrative experiences that allow participants to physically step into the fictional worlds. And sometimes we do this with cultural brands like HarperCollins, and sometimes with, for instance, contemporary artists, like our collaboration at the Berlin Biennial this year with Brody Condon, whose work is also showcased here tonight. Indeed many, of our immersive productions are independent work, and these are most commonly LARPs in the Nordic style. And a typical example is Inside Hamlet, which is a 3D LARP adaptation of Hamlet, which is played at the actual Castle Elsinore. And there are runs scheduled for this fall, if you're into that kind of thing. Now, for our company, these LARPs represent our R&D, our research and development investment. On the surface, what we do, this range of our project is enormous, right? But in practice, all of them are leaning on the exact same design principles, experience design and participation design, human interaction. And this is a skill set that we continuously develop in our role-playing and LARP work. So what we do in everything we do is to design physical and social environments that allow humans in different roles, sometimes fictional roles, sometimes not, to give them agency to act for themselves and to experience things together. And one company that we're working with, originally as consultants and now in a licensing capacity, is White Wolf Entertainment. Based in Stockholm, White Wolf controls a cluster of brands known collectively as the World of Darkness. I don't know why I did this, that is actually what it's called. The World of Darkness started out some 25 years ago as a revolution in tabletop role-playing, and since then it has also lived as other types of products, including digital games and novels, and an Aaron Spelling TV drama, which wasn't great, but still. Vampire the Masquerade, which was the first game in this story world, was originally subtitled A Game About Personal Horror. And just this week, actually, White Wolf have released a digital vampire piece where that description is updated to A Game About Personal and Political Horror. So this is a really interesting moment for us to engage with this IP. But since we work on really many different things, we wanted to make sure to only do things with White Wolf that are interesting for us from a design perspective. So everything that we do with White Wolf needs to always support these three goals: demonstrating the contemporary relevance, often political relevance, of the World of Darkness, encouraging and building positive community relationships among the players, something unfortunately that World of Darkness IPs have had trouble with in the past, and celebrating the co-creativity and passion that made World of Darkness so strong originally, and that also kept it alive during the last decade or so, when this property was basically not being commercially exploited at all. And based on these projects, we have a number of connected projects ranging from major World of Darkness themed games festival in Berlin this spring, you should go, to a summit for World of Darkness community influencers. And we're also producing big Nordic style White Wolf LARPs, one of which is currently touring, and we'd like to tell you a little bit more about that next. And now I shall play you, if we can, the trailer. actually enough. So just a few words of context. The World of Darkness is just like our world, except that monsters like werewolves and vampires have always existed. And at the heart of the vampire games lies the concept of the masquerade, which is that the vampires have made an active choice to live among the humans in secret. And in this LARP end of the line, it was developed in collaboration with White Wolf as a kind of experiential world story laboratory, giving the designers as well as the players a chance to engage very deeply with some of the core concepts of vampire. So the design goals were to explore this idea of personal horror, specifically how it interacts with the idea of the masquerade. What does it mean to be human in a world where humans are prey? But also to touch upon the political horror. How do humans end up in situations where they can go missing or be killed by a vampire without anyone noticing or caring? It's set in an illegal nightclub where low-level vampires hunt. All of the characters are monsters in one way or another. Most of them are humans. Students, criminals, nightclub organizers, sex workers on their night off, and so on. Regardless of their jobs, many of these humans are terrible, violent people, and the idea is that there's not that much danger difference between a low-level vampire and a very dangerous human. Both are capable of doing terrible things. Let's go right ahead. Thank you.
Hi. So this is set in the tradition of Nordic Lab, and it's, of course, here common to strive towards visual creating and bodily inhabiting the fictional world. Visually, what you see is what you get, but also what kinds of activities will your participants be doing? And this is a very important question in most of our work. In this case, the characters would be dancing, sweating, flirting, fighting, dissing each other, kissing, dealing drugs, taking drugs, performing sexual acts, hunting, and feeding. The goal was for the players to get an experience the characters' activities as realistically as they chose. Obviously, the drugs were not real, and the fighting, the sex, and the blood drinking simulated, but we wanted that simulation to be as fluid as possible. The lab was created for Solmukohta 2016, where it was run for a player base that is used to a very physical playing style. And in that way, they negotiated their interaction using a technique called bullet time consent, where you pay close attention to each other and you go very slowly. So you do your action slowly. It went really well. It was a great test of the narrative potential of this nightclub story. We were then asked to bring the lab to New Orleans to an event called the Grand Masquerade. In the US, very few of our players would have experienced this style of lab, and that brought in two central challenges. One is the traditional US vampire lab. The first rule is literally no touching.
No touching.
That means none whatsoever. This is the second edition book. In the first edition book, it was all caps. So it's been part of the culture very long. The second is traditional US vampire role-playing. The games are fundamentally competitive. The player characters have points, the games can be won or lost, and the story outcomes are intimately connected to plot outcomes. If your character succeeds in their goals, you win. If they fail, if they are hurt or die, you lose. In other words, the goals of the players and the characters are very closely aligned. You're in competition with the other players, you become very protective. If you are in competition with the other players, you become very protective of story outcomes. It can be very interesting role-playing. It can feel psychologically intense. It could be described as immersion through strategy. But that kind of role-playing, fundamentally, structurally, you can't trust the other players to care as much about your experience as their own. And end of the line is not competitive, it is collaborative. You can't win or lose, and the goal of the participants is to tell the most emotionally interesting stories together. Typically, the most interesting stories to experience are about characters struggling or failing. So here the goals of the characters and the goals of the players are very, very different. This, of course, allows for a wider range of different playing choices. Your character can be stupid, selfless, a risk taker, a masochist, and make bad choices that place your character at the mercy of other characters. And this, of course, works only if you trust that your co-players will use this power in a way that is interesting for you as for them. When you run labs for people who are not role players, they need to learn how to role play. But for us, what is really important to remember that even very, very experienced role players might have completely different basic assumptions about how to act and interact inside the lab machine. We knew this lab itself was very strong, but for this audience, we had to redesign our communication and also the interaction systems almost entirely. In all our design work, we focus a lot on the principle that our players are social as well as biological beings, and those two are connected. For instance, people only like to touch people they trust, but it is also true that once you touch somebody and nothing bad happens, you trust them more. So even though this talk is called Getting Americans to Touch Each Other, the title is also a metaphor for getting players from competitive gaming cultures to trust each other. Those two are very fundamentally the same. For this reason, we integrated touching into every step of our mandatory workshop. The first exercise, which we pretended was just an icebreaker, involved making eye contact with a stranger, smiling, shaking hands, and introducing yourself, and telling them which is your favorite vampire movie. Then we would very gradually increase intensity to touching somebody's shoulder, standing huddled together, and so on. So by the time that we were practicing the negotiation techniques and biting, everybody in the room had at least touched a few people, made eye contact with a bunch, moved together, and laughed together.
Okay, go.
Go. Neurologically speaking, this will make people feel like a group. We also use some socially coded language and exercises to establish some norms for the group and emphasize the distinction between players and characters. An example of the language we used was we kept repeating, this is a lab where players make great decisions and the characters make terrible ones. And we said that again and again. And we made people say that as well. And an example for an exercise is we did status lines where participants move along a line in the room to visualize how their characters felt about themselves. Am I a good or bad person? And then we did the same exercise where the players looked at their character and had to see if they were good or a bad person. And that, of course, gave a vastly different picture. And that was to separate the character from player.
We have to pick up the pace, I think.
Pick up pace.
Yes. So we already mentioned that in Helsinki we used bullet time consent, which means that if I kiss your character, I would move into it very slowly, and that would give you time to dodge or to direct my action or to lean into the kiss if that's what I want, or depending on what I felt is reasonable to play. And this is actually a skill that you have to learn as a role player over time, and it's very difficult to teach in a workshop. It requires an enormous amount of trust, so it wasn't appropriate for New Orleans for this run. But more importantly, it wasn't appropriate because that visually collapses the will of the player and the will of the character. And because we were trying to establish a different kind of playing culture, it was very important for us to make a separation between the player and the character in these kinds of situations. So for New Orleans, we introduced a two-step consent negotiation system where you first negotiate the story and then you negotiate the playing style. So if I'm playing with you and I would like to move the story in the direction of romance, violence, or sexuality, I think we said violence or drinking your blood, we decided that I will ask first politely if you'd be interested out of character. I ask, are you interested in playing this kind of content? And you respond yes or no. And then I say thank you, because when you communicate a limit to me, regardless of whether it's a yes or no, that is always a gift. And then we both ask each other, second step of the negotiation, how would you like to play this? So both parties describe what they'd be comfortable with, you find a common level, you say thank you, and then you play. If you come from a Nordic tradition, this might seem incredibly clunky, but it was actually very fast and very fluid. And compared to the kind of battle rounds these players were used to, where you break play for like 45 minutes to count points and like throw dice, that it was actually very, very smooth. So maybe we decide to play flirtation and kissing in the story, and we decide to kiss each other for real, but not on the mouth. Or we decide that the characters will have sex, but we will only have a hand on each other's shoulders and make sex noises. Or we decide to fight, and I tell you, my character is probably not very strong, so you're probably going to win. I'm happy to lose. Also, you can throw me around physically, just don't do it hard. Because vampires' trust and physicality were at the heart of this fiction, we set a minimum level of play for how vampires feed. And that level was that there would always be real biting. Either I would gently bite your neck, or I would place my hand on your neck or on your arm and bite my own hand. Of course, we'd both have to agree which level we're comfortable with. Now, compared to a playing style where you never touch anyone, even biting my own hand while it's on somebody's neck is actually very intimate and intense. But because we worked up to it and because we focused on establishing shared norms for the collective, everyone suddenly felt that this was completely reasonable. And also because the scale of the physical action now went all the way around to simulating sex very convincingly or to punching each other lightly, suddenly biting a stranger makes complete sense, right? Yes.
Telling very dark stories together in a system that requires trust and collaboration means the players have to be very brave. We believe very strongly that to be brave, you need to feel safe, and being safe can mean a bunch of things. It requires you to understand the norms of the space you're in, understanding what kind of behavior is expected and rewarded, and physically knowing the other people there are not there to they are not a threat to you. But feeling safe can also mean that your experience and expertise is respected. So even though through the lab did not require any point systems, we actually gave each character some points, not to direct what they could or could not do during play, but to give the players a tool they recognized that they could refer to if they felt uncertain about what their character would or would not do. For example, Chris here has 1 dot out of 5 in saying no, so he's really bad at saying no, and this gives a clear direction for the character. He's always hardworking and also positive, so he's the one who ends up with the bill. So that gives direction. Yeah.
Oi. Sorry. Ultimately, the most important design choice of all that we made in this project was to make ourselves available. We felt that before we went that we knew a lot about American LARP culture from decades of hanging out with American players here. But even so, we felt it was good to be safe. And in the days before the New Orleans production, it turns out, because it was in the context of a convention, our participants were already physically in the building, so to speak. So we sat ourselves at a public place at the venue every day, at a table with a lot of empty chairs around it, and we invited all of our participants very casually to come and have a coffee with us if they had time. Like, we need them to sign a paper anyway, maybe they can do that then. If they have any questions, they can ask them then. But of course, the real purpose of these meetings was for us to have informal conversations with them in a casual setting, which isn't like an interrogation, where we would be able to find out about their playing cultures, about their norms, about their expectations, and listen. Tell me about what you like what makes you disappointed, what are your conflicts in your play communities, all of those kinds of questions. And we actually changed a lot of things about the workshop and about the LARP based on the details and norms that we only learned about during these last 48 hours before the event.
So when you're in a subculture like ours or any subculture, it's super hard to understand what it is that you're actually doing. We have a lot of shorthand to explain what you're doing or want to achieve that is close to incomprehensible to outsiders. You need to ask a lot of questions and really, really listen. And to quote the Jedi Master Yoda, you must unlearn what you have learned. Thank you.
Thank you.